DNA is the language of life. It is genetic information which is stored and retrieved with algorithmic processes.
But when we look at the DNA, for example, in our cells, in the smallest, simplest cell we know anything about, there is so much complex information there that it's mind-boggling. It supersedes anything man is doing today.
Information is like many, many sets of encyclopedias. And it's basically an instruction manual on how to build a human cell and how to build a human body. Or actually, more accurately, it's less like a book than a computer program. It's like an operating system, but it's vastly superior to any operating system man has developed.
Yeah, there's nothing that we've come up with yet that can come close, right?
Nothing can come close. In fact, as every year we realize that it's more and more marvelous than we thought.
The digitally encoded genetic information of the DNA molecule is equal to many, many books worth of information, far more than what you see in this illustration. It is the recipe for the design and function of an organism. All of the structural features of an organism are defined by genetic information, plus information found in the structural design of the cell.
In the DNA, the information is stored in the form of chemical letters. Now, it is possible to write out the information of your DNA in paper and ink form. That's what the Human Genome Project was all about.
Information is the communication or reception of knowledge or intelligence, or knowledge obtained from investigation, study, or instruction. One stumbling block for materialism and evolutionism is that matter has no consciousness. It is not a thinking entity, and therefore cannot produce information. The communication or reception of knowledge or intelligence cannot come from matter alone. Matter has no knowledge. It has no mind. Nor does it have intelligence. Nor does it study, investigate, or instruct without the presence of mind. Any genetic process in the cell, designed to investigate, study, or provide instructions, was devised by a mind. One expert on this subject, Dr. Werner Gitt, Director and Professor of the German Federal Institute of Physics and Technology, Head of the Department of Information Technology, states, "There is no known natural law through which matter can give rise to information, neither is there any physical process or material phenomenon known that can do this."
In the 19th century, we thought that there were two fundamental entities in science, matter and energy. At the beginning of the 21st century, we now recognize that there's a third fundamental entity, and it's information. It's not reducible to matter, it's not reducible to energy, but it's still a very important thing that is real. We buy it, we sell it, we send it down wires. Now, what do we make of the fact that information is present at the very root of all biological function? That in biology we have matter, we have energy, but we also have this third very important entity, information. The biology of the information age, I think, poses a fundamental challenge to any materialistic approach to the origin of life.
It's becoming extremely problematic to explain how the genome could arise and how these multiple levels of overlapping information could arise. Since our best computer programmers can't even conceive of overlapping codes, what we're seeing is, and our best, the genome dwarfs all of the computer information technology that man has developed. So I think that, yes, it's very problematic to imagine how you could achieve that through random changes in the code. No one, even computer viruses are designed, and so there's not within all the programs of your computer, there's not a single 0 or 1 that's there by chance, and there's no junk DNA in these codes. Well, more and more the genome looks like a super set of programs, and it's very hard to imagine how that came together.
Another remarkable property of genetic information is its interdependence. Consider a bicycle. The parts of the bicycle are worthless to us without the list of parts. Likewise, the list of parts for the bicycle is worthless to us without the parts. We need both the list of parts and instructions for assembly, and the parts themselves, for the bicycle to be worth anything to us. Genetic information is the same way. It is also interdependent. Approximately 3%, per current knowledge, of the human genome is information which codes for proteins. The rest of the molecule is other information, and some of it is meta-information. Meta-information is information about other information. The remainder of the genome is also meta-information. It is information which defines an organism during its embryonic development. It is also information which determines how the coding genes which produce proteins are utilized. 73 to 94% of the human DNA molecule is decoded by the cell, per current knowledge. This is contrary to what the evolution defenders have been saying for decades. They have been saying that the majority of the DNA molecule was garbled junk left over from man's history of evolution. The processes of random mutation, which were mistakes, as all mutations are, left over, and provides no function. Today we know this to be completely false. It is vital information. The information which codes for proteins is dependent upon instruction sets elsewhere in the DNA, which govern its function. And the information which is meta-information is dependent upon the existence of the coding genes which produce proteins for the utilization of that information as well. This is interdependence, which cannot be broken. It is absurd to believe that random mutation could create two separate instruction sets in different locations of the genome, which would be required for each of them to have any value, and for this process to repeat itself countless times. But this is what an evolution defender must believe, to believe that random mutation is a mechanism for evolutionary change, or that genetic mutation, that random molecular interactions is what produce the human genome, or the genome of any living thing. It is completely absurd to believe such a thing. Modern science has discredited evolutionism.
Over 90% of the genome is actively transcribed, and that doesn't, there's probably more, but we have to study more carefully to find the function of the remaining part of the genome. And more than that, the genome has multiple overlapping messages. Try to imagine a book in a chapter, and that hidden, embedded in that chapter, in addition to the obvious meaning of the words in the chapter, are other messages. And even in the same sentences, there might be several messages embedded. And even more astounding is, the DNA has two strands, one running one way and one running the other. For the longest time, they thought the one strand was just for replication and all the information was on the other strand. Just one strand had information. What they found with the ENCODE project was more than 50% of the genome, both strands are read. So it's like reading a sentence forward, so it has one meaning, and reading it backwards, and there's another message there. So it's data compression on the most sophisticated level.
Wow. And as you suggest in your book, there may be other aspects to data compression that have yet to be discovered, like almost several dimensions, or 3 or 4 dimensional, or whatever the case may be.
It is multidimensional, and one of the things that DNA does, it's like a tape with letters on it, and you can read it in a linear way, but it also folds up like origami, and you can make huge architectural structures that fill the genome. And we're just starting to understand that all that folding is like the folding of a protein.
This interdependence of information represents interdependence and irreducible complexity. Some of the molecular machines of the cell required for the functions of DNA and the cell are helicase, primase, topoisomerase, polymerase, ribosomes, and transfer molecules. These molecular machines are all interdependent with the cell and with genetic information. For example, they require the DNA to exist because the information which produces them is strings of information in the DNA molecule. Likewise, because the DNA molecule cannot maintain and duplicate itself without the existence of these molecular machines, it is also interdependent with them. This is interdependence and irreducible complexity that cannot be broken. Furthermore, DNA is interdependent with RNA because the information of DNA is transcribed to produce the RNA molecule. The RNA molecule's information is then used to create the molecular machinery of the cell. Therefore, the RNA molecule is interdependent with the DNA molecule. Neither can exist without the other. This is interdependence and irreducible complexity, which cannot be broken. Likewise, the RNA molecule is interdependent with these molecular machines as well, because the information which comes from the DNA molecule to produce the RNA molecule is then used to produce the molecular machines which maintain and duplicate and error-correct the DNA molecule itself. This is further interdependence, irreducible complexity, which cannot be broken. Moreover, the entire cell and DNA are interdependent, because the DNA molecule cannot exist without the molecular machinery of the cell and its environment, nor can the cell exist without the genetic information which codes for the genetic machinery which maintains the cell and the DNA molecule. This is interdependence and irreducible complexity. All components of a cell are irreducible in complexity and cannot be broken, else the system will not function. The DNA is interdependent with RNA, which is interdependent with the molecular machines, which is interdependent with the cell, which is interdependent with DNA, and all of them are interdependent with each other. This is interdependence and irreducible complexity which cannot be broken. This verifies for us that evolution not only did not take place, but cannot have taken place. All of the components of a cell are necessary for each other, for its function. It cannot have evolved in part, by increment, over time. It must have all existed together, at once in the beginning, else none of it would have function or meaning. Therefore, evolutionism is not only false, but impossible.